Hey guys, Calamity here, and today we are doing a remake of an old video. I've actually done a should you pull version for Child, or Tartaglia, or whatever you want to call them, before, but I feel like I can do a much better job of it now. So, before we start the video, I always preface these by saying that, hey, if you like the character's playstyle, if you just like the character's personality, all that stuff, this is not a video telling you how to spend your primo gems. Go for it. This is a video trying to help those that are still on the fence on whether or not they want to pull for him for Tartaglia on his upcoming rerun banner. So, what is Tartaglia? Tartaglia is a main Hydro DPS character. He's a very popular character, especially in the Asia servers. That's why he gets so many reruns, apparently. He does, even though he's a bow character, he does most of his damage through melee, because he has a elemental skill that allows him to dual wield 2 water swords, and he does most of his damage from that, as well as a very hard-hitting burst. Tartaglia is also really great for groups of enemies rather than for bosses because of his Riptide mechanic. We'll showcase all these abilities and whatnot in a bit, but we're just explaining his kit right now. Basically, Riptide applies a mark to enemies. You'll see it in combat, and they'll basically just take more hydro damage as you're doing damage yourself. But yeah, let's go over his talents really fast. There isn't much to it. So his normal attacks, just like any other bow character, he does a little combo if you just, do left click or just normal attacks. His charge attack, just like any bow character, you charge it up and you aim it, and it will deal hydro damage. It will also apply his Riptide effect. So there's this very long paragraph here explaining what the Riptide effect is and how to apply it. So basically, just think of it as just more AoE hydro damage that you can apply to enemies. You'll see a lot of numbers when you're playing Tartaglia against a group of enemies. And he does have a plunging attack while he's in ranged form. If you are using his elemental skill and he's got the dual swords out, you cannot plunge. Next up, we do have his skill. This is pretty easy. Basically, you go from being a ranged bow character to being a dual wielding water sword character. Now, keep in mind, the normal attack actually has different multipliers than the skill. These are different damaging things. So if you want more damage with his his main source of damage, which is his skill, then you want to... I crowned this a long time ago, back when he was my main damage dealer, my only main damage dealer. And then we have his burst, which is basically, it's 2 different variations of his burst. He has a ranged version of it where he shoots a arrow that does a large AoE damage, hydro damage, and then he has the melee one, which does a slash with like a water scythe, and it also does a bunch of hydro damage. These also apply a Riptide blast, so if they're affected by Riptide, you'll see a little explosion. If you look at the skill attributes, you'll notice that melee does way more damage than ranged. However, that does not mean that the ranged version is completely useless. In fact, I'll talk a bit more about it later on, but in a lot of cases, most of the time you'll actually be using the ranged version over the melee, and we'll talk about this later. And then there's Riptide blast damage, but you can actually sort of see one of the reasons you want to do the ranged already is that you get energy returned if you do the ranged version. You get 20 energy back to you. His passive talents are pretty self-explanatory. I mean, we got extend your Riptide duration by 8 seconds. And this one makes it so that when you crit, your normal and charge attacks will apply a Riptide status effect to your opponents. Lastly, his passive is probably still one of the more unique ones in Genshin Impact because no one else has something like this. But he will increase your own party member's normal attack level by 1. So you can see that's why his normal attack is 9. Normally it would be 8, but because of this buff, it's 9. Unfortunately, this isn't that great on him, which is kind of weird because, again, most of his damage comes from skill and burst, not so much the normal attack. You can upgrade this if you want to when it comes to talents, but... Moving on to his weapons, he has a bunch of options, but I don't have them because I'm not a whale, but Thundering Pulse is also a good one for him. If you have Aqua Simulacra, of course, he has his own signature weapon now. The Polar Star, of course, is going to be his best in slot weapon. All these other weapons are also good. Blackcliff Warbow, also good. especially since you're going to be mainly using him for groups of enemies anyways. Rust is also a solid option. His dual swords attack and Riptide do count as normal attack damage. However, you do interweave charge attacks with his combos, so you are going to be affected by this downside a little bit. The Stringless would have been a good option if the weapon effect affected his elemental skill damage. It does not. I suppose it could be a really cheap option if you have nothing else, because the elemental mastery is good since you'll be using Child with a bunch of elemental reaction teams anyways. But there are definitely other options out there. Mouun, I'm not sure how to say that. Also a decent option. And then if you're really new or you just really don't have a lot of weapons to work with, a slingshot is also pretty decent, I suppose. Artifacts. It's pretty easy to build Tartaglia. He has a artifact set that was tailor-made for him, and it's called the Heart of Depth. You can get this pretty early on in the Dragon Spine Mountain, and basically it gives him more hydro damage, which he'll appreciate. And after he uses his elemental skill, basically going into dual sword stance, he will get increased normal and charge attack damage by 30% for 15 seconds. If you don't have a full Heart of Depth set ready to go, you can also just opt in for 2-piece Heart of Depth, or 2-piece an attack bonus set like a Gladiator's Finale or Shimenawa's, or one of the many other artifact set pieces that give attack bonus on 2-piece. Substats you want to look for Tartaglia are pretty much the same as you would for any other main DPS. You're going to want crit damage, crit rate, attack percentage is good. Elemental mastery is really good as well. Energy recharge you don't need as much. You could use some of it, but you don't need to heavily invest into it as you would with other characters. So you can see the plume piece here: crit rate, crit damage, elemental mastery. This one, crit rate, crit damage, attack percentage. The sands, you can either opt in for attack percentage main stat or elemental mastery, since Tartaglia is being used in elemental reaction comps. Crit rate, crit damage, you can see here, and some energy recharge, as I mentioned, is okay. For the goblet, hydro damage bonus if you can. Actually, you're just going to want a hydro damage bonus one. I suppose for like a filler piece until you get a hydro damage bonus, if you don't have one, you could just do either attack percentage or elemental mastery, but try to get a hydro damage one as soon as you can. And then for the circlet, this is more dependent on what weapon you're using and how your substats happen to play out. But you're going to want crit rate or crit damage here, depending, on which one you have more of, and you're just trying to balance out the two. And that's pretty much it for the substats. Constellations. I kind of want to talk about this real fast because just like most 5-star characters, Tartaglia is a very free-to-play friendly character, meaning you don't need his constellations, or like they don't feel necessary or like really good or OP and powerful to have. They're nice to have, don't get me wrong, but they're definitely not needed. And the one that I want to talk about in particular is probably one that can spark up some debate, and that is his Constellation 1, which decreases the cooldown of his skill by 20%. Now, the cooldown of his elemental skill depends on how much time you spend in his melee form. The longer you're doing the dual swords form and attacking enemies with it, then the longer the cooldown of it will be. It can actually be quite long, going from like 20 or like 30 seconds if you stay in the dual swords stance for like the entire duration. So I can see why this is a good constellation and it seems enticing. However, my advice to you is this: you shouldn't be in his dual sword stance for that long. If you're having a really long cooldown on his skill, something you need to figure out why, because you shouldn't. In my opinion, his cooldown should be maybe like 10 to 12 seconds, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but you should be reapplying things like, if you're, depending on what team you're using him on, like reapplying Bennett's Burst, getting Xianling's Pyronado back on the field. If you're using Kazuha, then getting his burst out back on the field and stuff like that, because their bursts don't last that long. And neither does his 4-piece effect on his set. In fact, it expires after, I said, 15 seconds on the 4-piece effect. So hitting stuff with the swords when you don't have any pyro application, any buffs out, including the ones from your teammates and the artifact set piece. So this might seem necessary, but you will learn to live with the cooldown it'll synergize well with you resetting up your teammates' buffs. So I don't think this is as needed as a lot of newer players think. Alright, with that being said, let's just showcase some basic attacks, and we'll actually show them in combat, and you guys can see the different burst animations, and then I'll talk about team comps, and that's hopefully it. So, just like any bow character, you left click, he has a little combo, it does some damage, it does physical damage by the way, and it's, you know, you're not really going to be using this. Charge attack, same as any other bow character, it'll infuse with a water arrow, and it'll do damage. That is how you can apply Riptide, by the way. One of the ways is by doing a fully charged shot on an enemy. And then next up, we have his skill. So you'll see he goes into dual sword stance. And the optimal combo for Child is to do a couple of attacks, 2 or 3, and then do a charge attack. And that's the optimal combo. So these last for quite a while, and like I mentioned, the longer you are in this stance, the longer the cooldown. So if we swap back to bow stance by pressing the skill button again, you'll see that I have well, I'm blocking it. Let me move. Alright, you can see now that I have well, it was 30 seconds. It's down to 18 now because I had to move my VTuber model over, but it has a really long cooldown of 30 seconds, but you should not be in this stance for this long anyways. And then we'll showcase the burst, which we already have. So that's the ranged one, and that's the one that does a little bit less damage than the melee one. However, that one refunds you energy up to 20 when you use it. And it's also sort of a good way to open up a combo because you can immediately go into the dual swords after and then just start damaging. Whereas if you do it during the melee stance, if you do your burst, it does eat up your, your dual sword time. So I like to use the melee one more as like a finisher, like a combo finisher, if you will. It does do more damage, but it will require more energy to get back. Alrighty, I got his burst back again, so we're gonna fight some samurai and showcase the melee version of the burst, as well as the just how he looks like in combat. So we're gonna use Kazuha here to group up the samurai. Maybe even apply Bennett's burst, and then go dual swords. Oops. Here's the melee version. Something to note about his dual sword stance is that it cannot be overridden by elemental conversion. So if you do have a Bennett at C6, don't worry, he'll still work with your Tartaglia. It does nothing for him, by the way, the C6 effect, I should say. You can still just use his burst, and Tartaglia will still do water damage. He is a bow character after all, so he wouldn't be affected by it regardless, but just in case you were wondering between the two characters. Oh, something I forgot to mention during the combat, I don't know if you noticed, but while I was attacking enemies, you might have seen a mark on their body. It wasn't on top of their head, it's on their body. That's the Riptide mark. So basically, when enemies are affected by Riptide, they'll just get more AoE hydro damage when you attack them and stuff. It's kind of subtle. You probably won't really notice it as you're swapping between characters and doing all these other stuff. But it's there. It's just passively more damage, especially on groups of enemies. Alrighty. Last part of the video, or getting close to the last part. Here's some good team comps that you can use with Tartaglia. This is the very famous, very popular, very meta Child's International team, which consists of, well, Tartaglia, Xianling, Bennett, and Kazuha. If you don't have Kazuha, then you can opt in to use Sucrose. I wouldn't use Venti because I don't believe Child can reach enemies in Venti's burst when he's in melee form. I mean, his ranged burst will work with it for sure, but I think Sucrose or Kazuha will be a better fit for sure. But yeah, this is one of the more popular teams. Very, very strong team. Can clear the abyss quite easily. Lots of damage. It is better for groups, but that doesn't mean you can't use Tartaglia for boss fights. It will just take maybe, a couple more extra rotations, but it's fine. You'll be able to clear chambers with plenty of time to spare, so it's not a big deal. There are other teams you can run Tartaglia in, though. For example, there's an Electro Charge team. Ignore the team names on the bottom left, okay? I had to use some slots. But you can pair him with Fischl, Beto, and then you'll see a lot of Electro Charge damage. The fourth slot is whatever you want to use. It doesn't have to be Bennett. You can put a different healer if you want, or a shielder, whatever you choose. But yeah, this basically lots of Electro from these two. Lots of Hydro from Tartaglia, which means a lot of Electro Charge damage. And because of Dendro in 3.0, I'm sure you can find something to do with Tartaglia and Bloom, Hyper Bloom stuff. So, this is this is a very Archon heavy team, but I'm sure you could, if you don't have Nahida, then you can use Kali or Dendro Traveler and try to set something up if you want with Dendro with him. I'm sure there's something viable. And that is gonna wrap it up for this video. It's kind of short-ish because, well, Tartaglia is a pretty straightforward character and he has been featured a lot in banners, so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with him. But hopefully this helps someone that's new or just still not really sure if Tartaglia is worth pulling. I should have some sort of Spiral Abyss combat background video playing right about now, so you can see more of him in action. But he's still a very strong character, especially for new players, because you don't need constellations for him to do well. Has a lot of weapon variability, lots of team comps that are easy to make. Like, anyone can get a Child's International team going because Zhongling, Bennett, and Sucrose are very, very common characters that I'm sure a lot of people have just from doing a lot of pulls. I don't think there's that much to say about him. He's just a very solid Hydro main DPS character. If there's anything I forgot to mention or I forgot to cover, feel free to leave a comment down below. But yeah, what do you guys think about Child? Are you gonna pull for him? Let me know. Good luck to you if you are pulling, and I hope you guys are enjoying the rest of 3.2. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks again for watching.